Welcome. My name is Brian Nelson. This is the second lesson in the Introduction to Programming with C# course. In this lesson, we are going to discuss an overview of C# and get started with our first program. Let's get started. As I mentioned in the first lesson, C# syntax fits into the C family of languages. This family includes languages like C, C++, Java, and JavaScript. While C began in 1972, C# came into existence around 1999. Its adoption really began with the release of the .NET framework in 2002. I mentioned that we would discuss more on how C# compiles and executes its code in this lesson. C# compiles its code to an intermediate bytecode format. This intermediate format is then used by a machine-specific, just-in-time compiler to generate native binary code on the fly. This means that any machine that has a .NET runtime available can run the intermediate bytecode. This intermediate bytecode format and just-in-time compiler capability allow programs to execute on multiple platforms. This course will focus on .NET Core. .NET Core is a modern implementation of .NET that allows for the most portability of code. C# is an object-oriented programming language. C# uses classes to represent conceptual objects. An object might represent any real-world object like a car or a camera or a pet. And each class can have properties. For instance, a car may have a property that represents its color, or it might have a property that represents the number of doors. Classes may also have methods that impact the state of the object. For instance, there may be a refuel method on a car, and this method might impact a fuel level property. There are many more features to object-oriented languages, but they will be out of scope for the purposes of this course. C# is a strongly typed language. This means that the compiler enforces that the correct type of values be assigned to the correct type of variables and properties. In the car example, the compiler wouldn't allow the programmer to assign the number of doors into the color property. A strongly typed language allows some of these mismatch type of errors to be caught earlier than other weakly typed languages might. We will get into variables, properties, and classes more in lessons 3 and 6 of this course. The programs that we will work on in this course will all focus on command line programs. This type of program runs from the terminal or from the command prompt. These programs are text-based rather than having a graphical user interface. A text-based program is much simpler to write than a graphical program. Hopefully, future courses will go into building programs with a graphical user interface. Console applications will allow the program to get text-based input and provide text-based output. When a console application is run, command line parameters can be passed in. This allows the program to receive parameters that can configure how it will function. Let's take a look in Visual Studio at setting up a console application and reading and writing from the console. For our second lesson, we're going to reset up a console app, and we're going to use this console app a little more than we used the last one. The last one, the test app, was really just a demo. So now we're going to go in to Visual Studio, and we are going to create a new project. And we're going to choose from, if you did the test app, it'll show up here as console.app.NET Core, or you can find it in the selection in the right. You can also filter that by picking C#. You can pick your platform. We're not going to worry about that. So anyway, we're going to pick a console app.NET Core, and you can see here C#, it'll run on Linux, Mac OS, Windows, and it is a console. So you can see where you can run these and different attributes. They're just tags. So we'll pick that. I'm going to go back and pick my source code, which I put in Documents, Source Code, Brian's Coding Corner, Intro to C#. And I'm going to select this folder. Okay, for now we're going to call this lesson 2. I'm going to place the solution in the same project. That's good. We're going to create that. We'll go back over this a little more. Just so we have the Solution Explorer on your right. You can click on the solution. That's kind of a binder for a bunch of projects. We have this lesson 2 project. Under that, dependencies, and we'll come back to this as we get a little more advanced, and then program.cs. Now, program.cs, you can see a bunch of stuff, and we'll go back into this terminology a little bit later. For now, this is the block of code that gets executed first. When we're debugging our code, we can drop a breakpoint here. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this. And click on the lesson 2 with the arrow up here. What that will do is it will compile the code, and then it'll open a console. You can see the console here. There's nothing to view right now, but this is your input and your output section. Because we put a breakpoint, it's stopped here. You can then go debug and hit continue, and it will resume from that breakpoint. So a breakpoint tells the IDE, Integrated Development Environment, to go ahead and stop execution so that we can inspect things. We'll come back to call stack. You can see some local variables here, args, that got passed in. It's empty. Console is basically a way to write out, and let's go ahead and if we go debug, you can step over. Basically, we want to step over the step, that's F10. So I'll go ahead and hit F10. Okay, now if we go back and look, hello world. So what that line did is said, console, let's write a line, and the text of that line is hello world. And then if we hit F10 again, the program ends. And basically you'll get this message that you can close the window. So we can just close that up. All of our code we will edit over in this window. We're going to come back to functions and parameters in lesson 6, but for now, to run a program or to run a console application, we need to define a static void main, and that will be the block of code that gets executed. The Hello World app is the first app most people end up writing, and it just proves that the code will execute. So if we take off the breakpoint and we run this, you'll notice it goes straight to the completion, hello world, and then the program completed. So the breakpoint lets you kind of stop and interact with the execution as a developer and look at values and see what's going on. This wraps up the overview of C#. In the next lesson, we will introduce the concept of variables, constants, operators, and arrays.